Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker tonight. Very interesting guy. He presented last time at our last event here at Urban Center. He is an award-winning storyteller and a member of the Alabama Storytellers Association and a frequent contributor to NPR's Says You. He's traveled all over the world, and he also told me that some of the best stories he has have come out of absolutely terrible decisions. And this that he's going to tell us, if you are a fan of Mad Men, is a classic example of that. It's very old school, it's very retro, a little bit naughty, but it's really good. Ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker tonight, Mr. Bob Berg.
Thank you, Brad. The summer of my 16th year, I spent 2 weeks in London, England. My friend Dan and his brother Mike were going to London to visit their dad and his new wife, and they invited me to come along. The farthest I'd ever gone on vacation up to this point was Disney World, so I eagerly accepted. Their dad was a transplanted American, but their mother, who they lived with, was from Bolivia, and Dan and Mike spoke Spanish at home. I tried talking to their mom once, but my high school Spanish was not up to the task. I worked part-time at McDonald's, and that night at work told my boss I'd need a couple of weeks off next month. Louis Joyner was working the grill with me that night. He asked why I would be gone so long, and I told him of my upcoming vacation. Louis was a big black man who could have been the model for Fat Albert. I did not think he was at all attractive, but he always had a girlfriend. It was all in his attitude, I thought. He said the key to his success was his membership in the Playboy Club, which gave him an air of sophistication the ladies could not resist. Mind you, he was 16 and far too young to get inside a Playboy Club, and the nearest one was in Chicago, but by God, he had the membership card. "Hey, Louis," I said, "can I see your Playboy card for a minute?" He took it out of his wallet and handed it to me. His name was embossed on the front of the card. I turned it over, and the back said the card would admit the bearer and guest to any Playboy club in the world: Rome, Paris, London, Chicago, Tokyo. London. Say, think I could borrow that for a couple of weeks? Our fifth night in London, after dinner at the Chicago Pizza Bar, we do England right. We walked through Hyde Park. For once, we didn't have any definite sightseeing plans. "What are we going to do?" Dan asked. I took the Playboy Club membership card from my wallet with a flourish and showed it to them. "It's simple," I said. "I will be Louis Joyner, and you two are my guests." They were all for it. The Playboy Club was within walking distance of the park, so we set off. But the nearer we got to the club, the colder my feet got. When we were standing in front of the entrance, I shoved the card at Dan. "Here," I said, "I don't like a Louis Joyner. You be Louis Joyner." Dan took the card without a word, and we went inside. The doorman took one look at the three of us and said, "Sorry, boys, on your way." He clearly saw us for what we were, three teenagers trying to pull a fast one. I was ready to apologize and leave, but Dan started babbling in Spanish. But to me, it was all gibberish. The doorman bouncer looked uncertainly at us and said, "Do any of you speak English?" Mike answered, also in Spanish. The doorman held up his hand in a wait right here gesture and walked off. When he was out of sight, I hissed at Dan, "What the hell are you doing?" He was worried if we don't speak English, we can't understand him when he tries to throw us out. I cut my reply short because I saw the bouncer returning with another man. The newcomer said, Dan extended the membership card and said, The interpreter studied the card, then he turned it back. And I said, the interpreter was satisfied and now turned to me. Well, he had asked a question, that much I could tell from the inflection. And he was clearly waiting for an answer, so I gave him one. See. See? I made him mad. C was not the right answer, so I tried again. No. That only made him madder. He yelled at me in Spanish, waving his arms wildly, and then Dan interrupted him and said, he looked a little sad and embarrassed, and he went on. Ah, the interpreter said, and he smiled at me and walked away. What did you tell me? What's going on? I whispered. Dan said, well, we're acting mentally disabled, so I told him you are. You told him I are what? Mentally disabled. Before I could tell him what I thought of that, the interpreter returned with his hand behind his back. He walked over to me and patted me on the head. And then he held his hand out from behind him and held it out to me. He was holding a Hershey bar. It's that too, he said. I tried my best to look special and accepted the candy. And then he said, hey, trying not to glare at Dan, I said, Rasmus. Senor interpreter patted me on the head again and took me by the hand and led me to his desk. He said something over his shoulder to Dan and Mike, who waved and entered the bar without me. I had to stay with my babysitter, lest the sight of the bunnies send me into a brain-addled, hormone-induced frenzy. I sat there for an hour, fuming. Then I said, with a few Spanish phrases I know in any word, I knew this in any language just about, where's the bathroom? ¿Dónde está el baño? He answered me, but I don't know what he said. I jumped up from my stool and I ran off in the direction he pointed, but detoured into the bar. Dan and Mike were sitting at a table in the back. I joined them and gave them hell while they laughed. One of the bunnies came over and asked me what I was drinking. I had never had any alcohol in my life. I didn't have beer. I looked helplessly at Dan, and he said, he'll have a slow gin fizz. The bunny was back shortly with the drink, and it tasted just like hairspray. We left the bar and went to the casino where I could do no wrong. I was up a couple of $100. Dan and Mike kept losing and soon tired of the slot machines. They persuaded me to go into the nightclub. A comedian I'd never heard of was opening for a singer I'd never heard of. We sat and listened, feeling very urbane. I discovered that after the fourth slow gin fizz, they stopped tasting like hairspray. In fact, they weren't bad. For the first time in my life, I was drunk. I wasn't buzzed, I wasn't tipsy. I was blotto, falling down, drunk, literally falling down. I got up to go to the bathroom, and the room started spinning. I took a couple of unsteady steps, just as a bunny walked by with a tray full of drinks. She bumped me, which was enough to cause me to lose what little bit of balance I still had. I instinctively reached out to steady myself, and I grabbed the closest thing, her chest. The bunny shrieked, which for some reason I found hysterical. I was still clutching her bosom, laughing. I was drooling. Just as Senor Interpreter walked in. His worst fears were confirmed. The sex-crazed simpleton was molesting the bunnies. He shuffled us off to the exit, yelling at us in Spanish the whole time. He opened the doors and pointed dramatically outside and turned to me and said, blah, 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 blah. And I looked at him and said, adios, dude, and vomited all over his tuxedo. But the worst was yet to come. When I returned home 2 weeks later, and Lewis wanted to know why Hugh Hefner wrote him to tell him he was banned for life from